Welcome to today's episode of Unthinkable, a podcast about the aftermath of incidents causing catastrophic injury or death, the experts who are called to serve when these accidents occur, and lessons that we can all learn and implement in our own personal lives. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, KyleBachus.com. Now here's the host of the Unthinkable podcast, Kyle Bachus.
Hey, everybody, it's Kyle Bachus. Thank you for joining us again. We have a great guest with us today, Dr. Micki Burns, who is the CEO of an organization called Judi's House, which we're going to spend some time learning all about. I'm very excited to have Dr. Burns with us today. Again, this is a podcast. If it's your first time watching it, it's a podcast designed to take you kind of behind the scenes in terms of how people deal with catastrophic injury or death when it happens to a friend, a family member. And we've talked with all kinds of experts from all different walks of life who interact with people who have suffered a terrible tragedy or loss. And it just is an opportunity to learn, to get some real information about community resources that are out there. And of course, just fantastic to have Dr. Burns with us today. Thank you, Dr. Burns, for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So I've indicated that you are the CEO of Judi's House. Can you tell us a little bit about Judi's House? And then I really want to talk also about how you ended up in your role at Judi's House and what your background is, because I think it's fascinating to see how people make their career choices.
Absolutely. Judi's House and JAG Institute is a family-based comprehensive bereavement center. We are located in Aurora, Colorado, and serve the entire Denver metro area. We provide bereavement counseling to children between the ages of 3 and 25 and their primary caregiver. And we also have an evaluation and research arm and a training and education arm. So we have some pretty extensive services that we provide to our community.
Wow. That's amazing. I look forward to learning all about that this afternoon. Can you tell me, Dr. Burns, about your background and you to the role that you currently have?
Absolutely. So I am a licensed psychologist with a focus on child and family. And when my story actually goes back to 1992, when I was a senior in high school and my dear friend Kyle Matthew Gerhart was murdered. And it really shook my little tiny town of Bonner Springs, Kansas. It's not something that we had ever anticipated. And Kyle was a close personal acquaintance of mine, and our entire community came together to really remember him and honor him. And that has really been something that's been influential throughout my career. Fast forward just a couple years after that, and my father had a massive stroke that really he should not have survived, but he did, and ended up being paralyzed on his right-hand side. He lost his ability to walk. He lost his ability to talk. He lost his ability to swallow, and went through some really extensive rehabilitation and ultimately was able to come home, but with diminished capacities. And my mother, who was his dutiful wife and stayed by his side through his healthcare issues, was shortly after that diagnosed with cancer and ended up dying about 8 months later. So those really pivotal years for me from 17 to about 20 involved a lot of grief and loss, and really as a relate of some catastrophic events that happened in my life. And from that, I was in college for part of that time. I ended up graduating and decided that I wanted to do more. I wanted to be able to give back and really make a more impactful difference on my community. And so ended up getting my master's and doctorate in psychology and practiced in community mental health for many, many years. And then in 2012, I was looking for a change. I was living in Dallas, Texas, and happened to look in a trade magazine and saw an ad for a position at a place called Judi's House in Denver. And having grown up in Kansas City, Denver was always a place. It was the gateway to the mountains. I always wanted to make my way here. And when I reviewed that job description, I was like, well, I have all the skills that they're looking for. I think I'll throw my hat in the ring for this position. And I got a call back the next day from Dr. Brooke Griese, who hopefully we'll have some more time to talk about today, and ended up interviewing. And it was at my interview that I was standing on the front porch of what was then Judi's house with Brooke. And she said, you spent the whole day with us. I'm curious about your personal tie to this mission. And it really was the first time that it occurred to me that this job was going to be more than just a position. It was going to be about my own healing from this trauma and tragedy that I had suffered all those years before. And so here we are 13 years later, and I'm now the CEO of the organization. And I have to say that those 13 years have included a vast amount of my own strength and healing that has come from getting to do the good work that Brooke and Brian have allowed us to do all this time. I hope that wasn't too long of a response.
Oh man, that's exactly what I wanted to uncover is it's very interesting in doing this podcast that nearly everybody who works with victims or survivors has something in their history and their background that you can see, puts them in a position to help and help themselves heal, like you're describing, and at the same time to help families that have suffered a similar loss. And boy, going back, it sounds like what a horrible time frame for your life, right? 17, you said 17 to 20. And how did you even have the strength to go to college and to figure all of that out? I mean, do you remember when you're looking back, do you look back, Dr. Burns, and say, wow, I'm a pretty strong individual, or what? Can you tell me a little bit about that process and how you just kept going?
Yeah, I consider myself very fortunate, especially now that I've been doing this work at Judi's house for 13 years, to have had a really strong family that supported me. I have 7 siblings, so I'm one of 8 kids, and through all of this, we really found that this tragedy brought us closer together, and our community wrapped around us. And so in that time, I remember actually, when my mom was in hospice in her last days, I was home from college for the weekend to be with her, and she knew it was Sunday night, and she looked at me and said, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "Well, I'm here with you." And she said, "I'm never going to be an excuse for not achieving. And so you need to go back and be at class tomorrow morning." So I headed back to school. I ended up turning around and coming back because she only had a few days left, but that has really stuck with me, that she wanted me to know that my circumstances didn't dictate my future. And I feel very privileged to have had a family that gave me that foundation, and to have a community and siblings who have wrapped around me and continue to lift me up and support me. And they're my biggest cheerleaders.
Wow. Well, it's amazing. And so, and just going back to this acquaintance that then was in high school, that this kid was murdered.
Yes. And it's interesting that we happen to be recording this today. I was talking with one of my clients this morning who lost her son very tragically at the age of 11. And I was telling her about how individuals who die young often live on through all of those who they have influenced. And I come to work every day and think about Kyle, and I think about the tragic way his life ended. He was stabbed over 37 times, and the assailant stole his car, and that's what it was all about, was stealing his car. Wrong place, wrong time. And I think about how his life ending led to so much change for so many people, myself included, his family, his siblings, everyone who loved him, and how it led to so much change for the individual who took his life as well and his family. And just how, when we think about the work that you do, Kyle, and your law firm, and how you are really with people at a time where they're fighting for justice for someone who has been wronged, and how much meaning goes into that fight for those families who have experienced such tremendous loss.
Yeah, it's when something happens, like your friend being murdered, and you get this sense of loss of control, right? That it's not fixable. It can't be controlled. And what I see with families who are contacting us, and something has just probably tragically happened a very short period of time before they're reaching out, and it's a way to gain some control over an uncontrollable situation, to be able to say, I can't control what has happened, but I can take some steps to protect and to fight for the loved one that's been lost. And that's, whether that's through the criminal justice system, like with your friend, or through the civil justice system, or a combination of those things. It's to try to fight back a little bit and to have some control. And then to see, here you're sitting here this many years later with your friend on your mind, and with as part of the legacy of that loss, extending and helping so many people through Judi's house, right? It's kind of incredible, really, if you think about it.
Yeah, their legacy, that they get to continue on and continue to have a positive impact through something that is so tragic. We talk about a concept here at Judi's house called post-traumatic growth, and that growth that comes out of going through something that is so unimaginable and unthinkable. And while we would give anything to not have gone through that tragedy or that trauma, that we don't get to have control over that. So how do we live through and thrive despite those circumstances?
Yeah, and incredibly difficult, but there are so many different ways that people kind of rise and have a positive impact as a legacy to to the family member lost. I mean, just this last weekend, my daughter goes to the University of Florida, which is where I went, and where my mom went. And after my mom was killed, and we set up a foundation there, and my daughter was just it's at the School of Theater, and one of the first scholarship winners of my mom's scholarship was starring in a show at the University of Florida, and my daughter is there. And just that sort of impacting my daughter, impacting this young woman who got a scholarship, impacting an entire audience of people. And it's just, there are ways that through horrible circumstance that there are great legacies. And my daughter texted me and saying, hey, mom would be her grandmother, my mom would be just so happy about being able to be a part of this years after her death. So it's and that's the kind of stuff that you, I think, help people work through.
Yeah. And we're so fortunate at Judi's house to get to hear those kinds of stories, Kyle, of how someone's memory lives on and how they get to continue having that meaningful impact. And it's really one of the great privileges of my role, getting to hear stories like the one you just shared. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So tell me, before Judi's house, what was your experience, this very traumatic and tumultuous time between 17 and 20? Did that drive you to become a psychologist, or were you connecting those two events?
It's interesting. One of the ways that Kyle, my friend, and I got to be so close was through a program in Wyandotte County, Kansas, and Kansas City, Kansas, that was run through the local community mental health center. And students at the high schools were selected to go through this intensive training to become peer counselors. And so Kyle and I were both peer counselors together, and that's one of the ways we had really grown our relationship. And so I was already on that track, I think, towards being in a helping profession. But I really think that these losses drove me to being in the chair I sit in today, although it wasn't always conscious for me. It was a slow, gradual movement in that direction. And so right after graduate school, I ended up in Dallas working at a community mental health center. And I was working with a wide range of children and families, some who had experienced death losses, others who had been through other types of trauma and tragedy. But that foundation that I got through my work at the Momentous Institute in Dallas really catapulted me into being able to join the team here at Judi's house and be a part of growing our programs from where we were 13 years ago. We've been around for 23 years now, providing services, and really to take us to where we are now and get to now be part of the vision of where we will be 30 years from now.
Yeah, tremendous. So can tell the audience, what is Judi's house? How did the idea for Judi's house first come about? And then you've talked about, and I know from watching your organization, I think that there's been tremendous positive growth and change in the services over time and the ability to provide help. So it'd be interesting just to hear about how somebody came up with an idea, how it started, and then how it's progressed.
I love that you said how somebody came up with an idea. I have a children's book on my shelf called "What Do You Do with an Idea?" And it was a gift to me from one of our co-founders, Dr. Brooke Griese. So we were founded by two incredible individuals, Brian Griese, who some of our local listeners will recognize as a former Denver Broncos quarterback, and currently the head quarterback coach of the San Francisco 49ers. So going back a little bit in Brian's origin story, when he was 7 years old, his mother, Judi Griese, was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she valiantly fought that diagnosis and was able to go into remission and was really healthy for a good 5 years. But when Brian was 12, her cancer returned. And as we know, with many types of cancer, when it comes back, oftentimes it's much harder to fight. And we're going back in time, right? This was many, many years ago, where our science and our treatment of cancer was nowhere near where it is today. And unfortunately, at that point, that cancer was very aggressive, and Judi died. And so Brian, at the age of 12, found himself grieving the loss of his mother. His father, Bob Griese, also a very renowned NFL quarterback, was working and doing the call on national football. And Brian found himself really wondering, who understands what I'm going through? Who can I reach out to? And what he recognized was that there really wasn't anyone who he knew in his community who had been through anything like him. And so he would wander the halls and kind of tamp down his grief reactions because he didn't want to be different than his friends. His dad took him to see a psychologist, which was some, middle-aged 40-year-old woman. And he was like, how's this woman going to understand what it's like for me, a 12-year-old who just lost my mom? His brothers were headed off to college. And so he really felt alone in his grief. And I tell people all the time that I'm grateful that Brian's decision about what to do with that grief was partially to focus on athletics and focus on academics, but he found a way to kind of motor through. Then when he came to the Broncos, he was recruited after being the MVP of the Rose Bowl at Michigan, where they won the national championship, and he came to be part of the Broncos crew here, and he met Brooke Griese or Brooke McClintock, and they went on their very first date. And this story has been relayed to me that Brian made Brooke dinner, and as they were sitting down to dinner, he said, "What would you do if you had all the money in the world? If you could do anything, what would you do?" And Brooke was studying at the University of Colorado at Boulder in their clinical psychology program, getting her doctorate. And she said, I would open a center for children who've experienced trauma, but I would want it to be a warm, inviting space, not like a hospital or a doctor's office, but a place where they can really feel comfortable to come in and open up about what they've been through. And Brian said, that's incredible. I want to create a space like that for kids who have lost someone. And so on that very first date, they sketched out the blueprint for Judi's house. And again, I sit here 23 years later, knowing that date was very successful. So we tell people all the time that Judi's house was Brooke and Brian's first baby. And from there, they said, okay, well, how do we do this? What's out there? Is there a model of how to create a center for children who are grieving? And luckily, there were some programs across the country, and there were some models that grew out of a couple of centers in Portland, Oregon, and Ohio. And the first question that they wanted to answer was, well, how many kids are grieving in Denver? How big of a facility do we need? What are we talking about here in terms of numbers? Because again, Brian is a very business-minded individual, and he wanted to make sure that he had a good business case as he went forward. And what they found was there was no really solid data out there about the number of children who are bereaved. And I think that was an indicator for them of the lack of focus in our society on the impact of bereavement, and specifically the impact of bereavement on children. This idea that children are resilient and they'll get through it really started to come to the surface for them. So they got together a bunch of dedicated community individuals and started raising money to purchase a home, and started a peer support program for bereaved children, where kids could come together and be with other kids who have experienced a similar type of death loss, and their caregivers could come together and be with others who are raising bereaved children and talk about their experiences and take away that isolation and loneliness that Brian had felt all those years before. Now, we've gone through lots of change since then, and I'd love to share more about how our model has changed and about how our services has changed. But that's really our origin. There is Brooke and Brian's first date, and really saying, what do we do with this idea?
And just going back to it's one thing to have a concept and an idea, and even a well-focused idea, but the work that it takes to take an idea and turn it into an actual living and breathing organization. Can you share with us what your understanding is of how did they, what steps, you're sitting there on a date, that's great, right? But now you're going to go out in the real world and make this happen. Who did they recruit and how did they make it happen?
Yeah. And to think that they did this while Brooke was getting her doctorate and Brian was in his rookie season as an NFL quarterback, right? What kind of determination and drive did they have to keep this going forward despite all these other pressures that they had? So I believe that one of the first things that Brian did was he called up his network and said, who are some of the most successful business people in this community? And he sat down and he met with those individuals and told them, this is what I want to do. And they introduced him to people who introduced him to people. He got to know a little bit about the nonprofit sector. So something that I don't think I've mentioned is from the very beginning and still today, all of the services that we offer at Judi's house are provided at no cost to the families that we serve. And so they really started to work both on how do we create a 501c3 and how do we fundraise for this issue and how do we build our programs. All three of these things were happening while these two bright-eyed 20-somethings were also, moving forward with their own professional careers. And so it really took reaching out to the community and enlisting the support of the community, and one, recognizing the importance of this issue, and two, giving their time and resources to making sure that Denver, Colorado could be a place where we would have a model service center for children and families who are bereaved.
Well, and the other thing is, even if you can And it sounds like he had access to resources and took great advantage of those, and really, and as a couple, they willed this into existence. It sounds like, but then you have to have an audience too. I mean, you have to be able to reach out into the community and let people know, one, that you exist, period, and two, boy, that you are a resource that is not going to financially burden families. Amazing, right? Amazing to think that here you are. What a blessing to have in this community an organization that's willing to provide those such desperately needed services people may not even know exist at the beginning. They didn't know. I know so many people know about you guys now, but then and it's going to be at no cost. Crazy, amazing. So how did they find the audience?
Yeah, I think that this network of loosely put together national organizations across the country really was instrumental in that piece. And what I've heard, because I wasn't part of the organization at that point, was they really went to the empirical literature to say, okay, what exists to help children and families like this? And then they went to the grassroots organizations that were all across the country. And so Brian and a number of other executive directors and individuals who have been through their own tragedy and triumphed by bringing these types of services to their own community came together, and they had their very first meeting here in Denver at the University of Denver campus, and they all stayed in dorms and they had a conference, and that organization is now the National Alliance for Children's Grief and has over 1,500 members and member organizations of centers across the country that really work to advance this field from what we were back then, which was primarily a peer support program, to a program that is much more inclusive of a wide variety of services and really firmly grounded in research and evaluation.
Wow. So I do want to make sure that we talk about what services a family might have available to them through your organization. But first, I think it's really important for the audience to understand how your organization has changed and grown over the period of time that it's been in existence, and the services maybe that you originally offered versus the full scope of what you guys are doing under your leadership now. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, we started as a peer support program where kids, excuse me, Kyle, where kids and families came together and they shared their experiences. And there is such beauty in that opportunity for those individuals. Over time, and really right around 2008, we started to notice that we felt like, one, our kiddos walking through the door were coming in with a higher level of trauma. They had had more challenging life experiences where some of that peer support, volunteer-led programming was really potentially putting them at risk for being opened up, but then not getting the kind of help that they needed. And so at that time, we worked with the University of Colorado at Boulder to do an evaluation of our programming. And what we heard from our caregivers was that they wanted more structure to the program. They wanted more regular meetings. They wanted closed groups where they knew who was going to be there from week to week. They wanted that commitment from others that, hey, we're going to go through this together and we're going to share openly because we're going to develop a deep trust for one another in the kids groups and in the adult groups. And so that really led to the development of a program that we have tended to over the years here at Judi's house called Pathfinders. It's a 10-session evidence-informed grief, multifamily, multi-group grief-focused, trauma-informed program that families come and they go through this program in a number of different modalities. So they might go through it individually. They might go through it as a family. They might go through it in a group-based way. But this 10 sessions guides them through some of the fundamental issues that children and families who are grieving have taught us over the years are some of their biggest hurdles. And so Pathfinders is the name of that program. And that is our primary service program. We're currently doing a randomized control trial here at Judi's house to be able to investigate the effectiveness and have it actually be an evidence-based program that we will share more broadly with that entire National Alliance for Children's Grief and Beyond community to make sure that they are using best practices in their services. So that's our direct service. We also offer individual, family, couples therapy. We do thorough assessments with every individual who seeks our services. And we help get them connected with other services in the community if their needs are beyond just the grief or if their needs are beyond our areas of expertise and competence. And so that locally is really what we're most well known for. But we have two other strong initiatives that are a major part of our services to the community. And I'll talk first about our evaluation and research initiative. And that's where we really have a national footprint. So when I mentioned that Brooke and Brian's first question about how many kids are bereaved in our community was unable to be answered, they commissioned some really smart statisticians and actuaries and other individuals to develop a model that's called the Childhood Bereavement Estimation Model. And we use that model to produce reports annually on the number and percent of children who are actively grieving and the number of children who will be grieving by their 18th birthday. That tool, the CBEM is what we call it for short, is largely funded by the New York Life Foundation, which is the largest funder of childhood bereavement in the country. They have given millions and millions and millions of dollars to this issue and have really advanced the field. What that model tells us here in 2025, and these are data that we haven't put out yet. So if you go to our website, you won't see this, but you will very soon, probably in April. But we know that 1 in 11 kids in the US will experience the death of a parent or a sibling by their 18th birthday.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That is, even somebody who works in this space myself for 25 years, that seems to be an astounding number. That's a much larger need than I would have imagined if you had asked me about it.
Yeah, if you think about, like you mentioned that your daughter's at the University of Florida, you think about the size of her graduating class. And 1 out of every 11 kids in that class had likely experienced the death of a parent or a sibling. When we think about it that way, it really brings home how important it is that we are providing these kiddos with the resources to be able to cope with this tragedy and go on and continue to thrive. And so that is a huge, huge part of our programs. We also have another national program called the Childhood Bereavement Changemaker Initiative. And that's where our team of evaluators and researchers here at Judi's house work with grief centers from across the country to help them use data to improve their programs and to evaluate their programs so that they can strengthen them and be more effective for their community, which is a really innovative way to help bereaved children everywhere, not just here in Denver. And then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask just about that. So this national kind of working with other bereavement centers, are there like conventions that in this field that people go to? How do you become interconnected?
Yeah, that the National Alliance for Children's Grief is our largest convener, and they have an annual symposium every year. Last year it was here in Denver, and we actually had about 450 people here on site at Judi's house just for a site visit. The actual convention was downtown. This year we'll all be in Kansas City the first week in June, and there's usually about 700 individuals who attend it. So it's still a relatively small field, but individuals who are really dedicated from across the country and even internationally. And then there's a couple other organizations. The Association for Death Education and Counseling, or ADEC, also has an annual symposium every year or conference every year that brings together researchers, practitioners, individuals with lived experience in order to say, how are we supporting the bereaved and how could we do a better job?
Wow. And I think you were going to tell me about another one of your programs.
Yes, our final core initiative, as we call them, is training and education. And that is where we provide training to our communities. So we will do things like this podcast today, where we want to raise awareness. We go and speak with victims advocates. We go to classrooms and talk to teachers. We do education for entire schools where we talk with kids about what does it mean to grieve and how do you know if you're grieving and how can you be supportive to a friend who's grieving. And then we also have an intensive training program here at Judi's house where we train about 20 graduate and postgraduate individuals who are seeking careers in mental health and behavioral health. And we really work with those individuals to make sure that the work they do once they leave Judi's house is grief informed in a way that we don't always pay attention to and give the kind of focused, concentrated effort to in our graduate programs.
Wow. I mean, you are taking on a lot, Dr. Burns. I mean, to help lead all of these initiatives and programs. I mean, when the Grieses look at what has happened with this seedling that they created 23 years ago and what it's blossomed into, it's just got to be amazing to look back and to see how much of an impact you're able to have in the community.
Yeah, I think that they are sometimes pinching themselves to say, wow, look at what Judi's legacy is. Look at all that this tragic experience of this 12-year-old boy has led to in terms of healing for so many others. It is really a remarkable story of taking a trauma and turning it into something that is beautiful and healing. And I have to say, you're giving me way too much credit. We have an amazing team here at Judi's house. And truly, if it weren't for everyone who has been a part of our community, from our donors to our volunteers, to our board members, to our clients, to our staff, we would not be where we are today. And we are grateful for the impact and the influence and the contributions that have allowed us to be what we are now.
And so I do want to hear just about how a family starts a conversation with your organization. You know, what that looks like. And you know, I hear when people reach out to lawyers, I mean, it could be a big step, right? Do you think about it? You're mulling it over and, man, I'm going to pick up the telephone and I'm actually going to try to call a lawyer. Maybe I've never had one, or I'm actually now going to reach out to Judi's house. What does that look like? And what does that feel like? And what do you hear about people? Is there a fear associated with reaching out, and how do you help overcome that?
Yeah, I really appreciate you asking that question, Kyle. And it just shows me how much you understand what these families are going through. I think a lot of times the families who get referred to us tell us that I never knew about your services until we went through this experience. And then 3, 4, 5, 6 people said, have you reached out to Judi's house? And so our number one referral source is word of mouth. And we really covet that trust that the community has in us. And so we are very thoughtful and intentional about how we welcome families into our programming. And so once a family has this experience, we know that they may be ready to call us that day, right? I'm going to call, we just found out about this loss. I'm calling Judi's house today. For other families, it may be years before they're ready to call us. And so the first thing is knowing that we'll be here regardless of how much time has passed since your person died. And we will be ready to listen to your story and really help you assess what your family needs now. From there, what often happens is all of those community of individuals who have said, you've got to call Judi's house, they start calling us and they say, my neighbor, they just had this loss. I know they're going through a hard time. I'm just trying to be helpful. Could you call them? And there was a time in our history where we would. And what we often heard from those families was, how do you know all these personal details about my life? You're a complete stranger. Why are you calling us? And so we have now said, you know what, we're not going to do that anymore. You let your neighbor know about us, and when they're ready, they will call us. And so all a family has to do once they get to that point is pick up the phone and call Judi's house. They will be connected to one of our grief care coordinators who are specially trained and take individuals who will gather some basic information about your loss experience and send out an application that provides us with some more information so that we can schedule that initial assessment and really get that family the kind of information they need to say, okay, what do we need to be engaging in order to get on this path that will hopefully lead us to a place of finding purpose, making meaning, and being able to continue and thrive.
And so when somebody reaches out, do they have to know, I want individual or I want a group, or do they have to come to the table with anything beyond I'm hurting and need help? Can you just describe what they need to know before they call?
Yeah, I mean, they may have an idea about what they think they need, and we welcome them to share that with us. Absolutely. What we really want to do is take the expertise that every child and every caregiver who comes to Judi's house brings with them about their life and all that they are walking in the door with. And we marry that with the expertise of our team who has been working with bereaved children and families for all these years. And we bring all that information together and make recommendations for services for those individuals of the family and the family unit as a whole. And that really is where a family might walk in saying, we really want to be in group. But by the end of that assessment, our clinicians might be at a place to say, I wonder if we should do some one-on-one work with your family before we start group. Or I wonder if we should get you connected with this individual in the community who can help you with some of the more immediate needs that you have. It looks like financial strain is really something that you're struggling with right now. Let's get you to be able to address that first so that when you do come to Judi's house, you actually have the capacity to be able to engage in this kind of therapeutic grief work in a way that you aren't still in that period of shock and overwhelm.
And is there an age that's too young, that maybe they've lost a parent this year and they're 2 years old, let's say? Is that too young? And then what if, on the other hand, maybe they lost a parent this year, but they're not ready or they don't recognize a need until they're 6 or 7. And so this loss is 5, 10 years in the past. Is that an impediment also?
I want to be clear and say you're never too young to grieve. So we see grief reactions in children, who are months old, all the way up to, you and I sitting here. So you're never too young to grieve. At Judi's house, the type of programming that we offer is most effective for individuals age 3 and up. And so we have some very specialized programming for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, a program called Judi's Rainbow that is really geared towards what their capacity is in terms of being able to talk about their loss and identify feelings and find ways to cope, all the way up to the young adult programming that we offer for individuals 18 to 25. So really there's no restrictions outside of that. We treat families who have children who are actively grieving between the ages of 3 and 25. So that's a requirement to qualify for our programming. I think your other question of, is it ever too early or too late? Absolutely not. We have families who come through and it's been 10 years since the loss. And that's where that assessment is so crucial to being able to say, okay, what does this family need that's maybe unique to the family that was here earlier today, who experienced a loss 3 months ago. And it's not to say that we won't make the same recommendations for both families, but we're really going to make that recommendation coming from a place of marrying, again, their expertise on their life experience with our expertise on working with bereaved families.
It's amazing. But before I know our time's running short, before I let you go, I do want to ask, you indicated that the services are all at no cost to those that you're serving, but they do cost. It is expensive to run the type of operation that you have put together and are running. One, how can people help? And then I know that you guys have a luncheon coming up in May, and I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit about that too. But just how can members of the community here or elsewhere that might be exposed to this say, man, this is something that I would love to support in some way or another? How can they help you?
Thank you for opening up that space, Kyle. We have about a $5 million budget that we have to earn every year. So we have to find a way to cover those general operating expenses. And we rely so much on funding from the generosity of our community. And so there's many ways you can get involved in the work at Judi's house. We would love for you to be a donor. If you go to our website, there's a real clear donate button that you can press, and you can donate on a monthly basis. You can make a one-time contribution. You can reach out to our fundraising professionals and talk to them about planned giving or other ways to support our cause. So that is definitely something that we are reliant on. We are also reliant on volunteers. We have volunteers, if you're in our community, who do everything from helping us weed the garden to sitting with us in our children's groups, helping to guide them through our different programming that we provide. And so really everything along the continuum. We provide dinner to our families every night, and we have volunteers who come in and serve that dinner and help to clean up the kitchen afterwards so that our clinical staff can be focused on what they need. And then you mentioned we have events that we offer throughout the year, and we're really excited about our upcoming luncheon, the Strength in the Face of Adversity luncheon, which will be happening on May 2nd at the Sewell Ballroom. And I can't share who our celebrity guest is going to be, but if you follow our social media posts, you should be able to find that out in the coming weeks. But I think that it's a real talented individual from our community who has really themselves overcome some major adversity in their life and has been willing to share the stage with Brian in order to talk a little bit about their story. So we would love to have individuals join us, either sponsoring a table or buying an individual ticket to be part of that event on May 2nd.
And how do you go about the business of doing that? Just go to your website and is there something there that would lead people to connect with you?
Yes, if you go to our website and go to the Get Involved page, and it'll have attend an event, and you should be able to see all the information that we have about our Strength in the Face of Adversity luncheon.
Wow. Well, that's great. Well, Dr. Burns, I just can't thank you enough for spending time with us today and sharing with us about your passions and your background and the wonderful things that Judi's house is doing. And it's just remarkable. And it warms my heart to know that you guys are out there. And I know how many of the families that we work with that you've helped over the years, and just personally appreciate that. I know how much the families do as well. So thank you so much for being with us today.
And thank you for this time. I really appreciate you shining a light on our issue.
Okay, great. Okay, guys, that's it. So this is Kyle Bachus, another episode of the Unthinkable podcast. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.
You've been tuning into the Unthinkable podcast with your host, Kyle Bachus. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, kylebachus.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.